Hello and welcome back to my channel. For today's video, like the title says, I want to talk about some books that I don't like. I had a lot of fun in one of my last videos when I told you about my favorite books, and I also read one-star reviews for those books and reacting to them. And I thought it would be equally fun to flip the coin and do the same for books that I don't like. So I'll talk about some books that I didn't like, that I hate, although hate is a big word, and I'll read five-star reviews for those books and see what people who absolutely love these novels have to say about them. And before we start, I feel like I need to preface all this by saying, of course, this is my subjective opinion. There's nothing wrong with liking these books, as it's nothing wrong to hating these books. And as you saw in my last video, I didn't take it personally reading those one-star reviews because know that everybody has its own opinion. I think this is something common, I don't need to say it, but I'll mention it. If you come across your favorite novel, just know I don't hate you, or I don't hate you for loving this novel. I just didn't like the novel. And as I said, hate is a big word. It takes a lot for me to hate something, and I don't think there is a book that I actually hate. But it sounds more catchy if you say six books I hate instead of six books that I don't really like. And another thing I have to say, because to be honest, it was really difficult for me to find books I didn't like. I'm just lucky like that. Well, that comes the territory of reading classics and universally loved books. It's highly unlikely to come across something that you don't like, in the sense that you get something out of all of them in a way. Maybe yes, maybe you don't like the style, maybe you feel like it's too pretentious or too long, but ultimately you still get something out of them. At least that was my experience with reading a lot of classics. So it was difficult for me to come up with books I didn't like. And for that reason, two of the novels that I'm gonna talk about today I did like, but I don't want to read them again. And I'll leave them for the end of the video, and I'm sure that once I mention them, you'll understand where I'm coming from. Oh, one more thing I wanted to mention is some of these books I didn't finish. I'll admit that, but that being said, I still read more than half of that novel. So, and I feel with a novel, especially if it's like a longer one, and you'll see some of them are longer novels. If it's like a 600-page novel and you read 400 pages out of it, I still feel like you can make a pretty good opinion. And if you don't like it in the 400 pages, it's highly unlikely that you like it in the last 200. So with a shorter novel, I feel this can change, but with longer novels, this is my opinion. So yes, some of the novels I didn't finish, and I will let you know which. But I still feel like I can form an educated opinion on them. Without any other disclaimer or introduction, let me tell you a little bit about the books that I don't like. The first novel that I want to talk about will probably come as a surprise if you've seen my video with my top favorite books, because it's from one of my favorite, if not my favorite author, and that is The Adolescent by Dostoevsky. I've read all of his big novels and some of his novellas. I love all of his work except The Adolescent. I attempted to read it 3 times. I feel like it has a very slow beginning that drags on. And I don't know, for the first 2 times I just couldn't stick to it and get into the action. Third time I managed to do it. But still, I don't know, I felt like something was missing. You still get all of the Dostoevsky elements, you still get psychologically complex characters, you still get the drama, you still get the social dilemmas and so on. But still, it felt like, I don't know, maybe it was more superficial. Maybe it was my expectation, because I read this when I was a teenager and I expected to relate to it more than I related to his other novels, and I didn't. So maybe that's the one reason I didn't like it. Either way, I read this is one of the novels that I didn't finish, and I had like 50 pages left of this novel, and I just didn't care to finish. I don't want to say I couldn't. It's not like it was difficult to read. It was just one of the situations that I didn't care to finish because I didn't find it interesting. Maybe if I were to reread it now, I would change my opinion. Maybe I will give it another try. It's highly unlikely because I would rather reread other Dostoevsky novels that I know that I enjoyed. Now let's read some reviews from people who enjoyed this novel, and I'll also read them from my laptop. And again, I'll look down, but I'll also put them on the screen so you can read them as well. First review, this person says, "The Adolescent requires a diligence that I only partially have, so I look forward to rereading this in the future. Themes in his previous novels, like Notes on the Other Ground, The Gambler, The Double, and Demons, resurface and intermix in The Adolescent. Dostoevsky's psychologically complex characters bring a depth to the narrative which is unsurpassed by other authors." I don't disagree with this review, but you could apply it to almost all of his novels. Yes, it's definitely a complex novel, and maybe I didn't have the understanding necessary to read this novel. Although I have to say, for me, The Adolescent was like the last big Dostoevsky novel that I read. So before it, I read Crime and Punishment, Demons, Brothers Karamazov, The Idiot. So I read all of these difficult and intimidating novels that are full with I don't know, complex themes that take a lot of patience to understand it, and they can be too much for a younger person, and they were definitely too much for me. Again, I don't pretend that I understood all of them, but I still enjoyed the novels. So that's the reason why I say I feel like something was missing from The Adolescent that made me dislike it when I liked all of the other novels. Let's see another review. This person says, "This is an astonishingly important novel for anyone who's ever had a distant father." And maybe that was another reason I didn't like it. I cannot relate to this personally, so maybe if you do, you can let me know. But of course, that just goes to show how subjective our opinions are. Let's see one last review. "Fyodor really makes me want to die. He's so cool, but mean." I agree. I definitely get this feeling sometimes. Next book on the list is a novel that's not very well known, and I found out about this novel and this author because of a literature festival here in my city, and that novel is called My Friend Natalia by a Finnish author whose name is, and I know I'm not going to pronounce this correctly, but I'll try, Laura Lindstedt. Maybe. This novel starts off with a very interesting concept. It's about this woman who is obsessed with sex, and she goes to therapy trying to solve her obsession. The novel is from the point of view of the therapist who talks about this Natalia, which is not her real name. This therapist, we don't know their gender. How the therapist helped this person, this woman, to process her obsession and overcome it. So a very interesting idea, but I don't know. Again, I felt like something was missing. It definitely, when I first picked up this book, I expected it to, I don't know, use sex for the shock value, and I don't know, it be about sex just because sex sells. It wasn't that, which I appreciated. That being said, I don't know, I found it a bit weird. The relationship between the therapist and this Natalia definitely wasn't professional, and that wasn't addressed at any point. And maybe some people might say, well, that's the point, he's not a good therapist. I don't know. I feel like it missed the mark for me. Again, something was missing from it. When I discussed with one of my friends about this novel, we thought maybe it's a translation problem because I'm not Finnish and I don't know Finnish. I obviously read the translated version, so maybe it's a translation problem that made it feel like something is missing. I'll never know. Either way, the version that I read in Romanian, I didn't really like. It was one of those situations when you feel like it can be something complex, but the author doesn't really go more in depth. There's something that I don't know they don't tackle. They just give you the thing that sounds deep, but they don't actually develop it. At least that's what my impression was. Let's read some 5-star reviews. First person says, I absolutely love this book. The form and structure are unique and invigorating, and the prose itself is fun and exciting. I really admire books that go experimental and sidestep the conventions of fiction, so this novel really delivers. Highly recommend, especially if you want something that breaks norms established in a lot of commercial literary fiction. Yes, it's definitely out of the ordinary, you could say. Experimental, maybe, although I feel like there are a lot of experimental novels, so what even is experimental? It's interesting that you get to see kind of a file of the patient, because you also have pictures that Natalia draws, so that's interesting. But at the same time, problem is when you get someone like a therapist talking about a patient, you expect to get a very well-rounded psychological profile, if you want, because they have a lot of information on you, and obviously they have this education to analyze it. But felt it didn't felt like that. I know Natalia as a character felt quite bland. Let's read another review. Alright, sorry. This person says, unnerving, thrilling, scary. These words define a few of the emotions the reader will experience. A woman seeks help in therapy. Her mind, emotions, actions are dictated by sex. Seeking help in therapy, she becomes the experiment herself. The therapist is intrigued and somehow drawn to this patient, who brings her clock to time and records session. It is a ride not to be missed. If you have ever wondered what therapy is like, here is an insight you will not forget. Well, look, this makes me a bit concerned because, as I said, the relationship between the therapist and Natalia is not exactly professional. And I don't think, if you want to see how therapy is, I don't think this book is a good example, especially at the end. There is an end scene, and I'll say this is a spoiler, so. And this is a spoiler, so you skip to this time or whatever if you don't want to hear it. But there is an end scene when Natalia goes to therapy and she pleasures herself in front of the therapist, and this is ultimately what makes her feel better, because after that she doesn't come to therapy anymore. And this is not addressed, so the therapist is just like, oh yes, yeah, this happens, and this is Natalia, and I was there like, I don't know, it feels, first of all, doing this in front of someone without asking for their consent has to be some kind of assault, right? Because you include them in a sexual act without them consenting to it. Second of all, again, I feel like with a therapist, it's highly inappropriate. And it made me feel kind of icky. I disagree. I mean, I'm glad this person liked it, but I disagree with this person. If you ever wonder what it's like to go to therapy, uh, don't read this book. Talk to a person who has been to therapy, or just go and see for yourself. If you want to read about a potentially inappropriate relationship between a therapist and their patient, then yes, read this book. On to the next novel, which I think will be a bit more controversial. We're getting into controversy territory because these are very loved novels. And the next one is, and for this one I actually have the book, Wuthering Heights by Emily Bronte. Like a lot of English literature that I present here, this is a novel that I had to read for university. Because I did English literature, and of course, if you do English literature, you'll have to do Victorian literature at some point. So was part of that course, and I had to read this, Jane Austen, Charlotte Bronte, and Thomas Hardy. So there were a lot of English Victorian novels that I had to read for that course, and I liked all of them except Wuthering Heights. I read Jane Eyre and Wuthering Heights back to back. Jane Eyre being the first one. which I absolutely loved. Anyway, Jane Eyre was a very beautiful book. I really loved the writing style most of all. I don't know. It's just there is something when you read and the it feels like the sentences just flow like a river, I want to say, and just go one after the other. And you feel how much thought went into them, and it feels so satisfying to just read and have this feeling of words flowing off the page. Anyway, so I read Jane Eyre. I really liked it, and it was very well written. And then I got to Wuthering Heights, and I don't know, it felt like I was reading something by written by an amateur. I know it's harsh. I know that it's a well loved book, and I can understand that for its period. Yes, it was more experimental, having these flawed characters. Because in Jane Eyre, yes, you get Mr. Rochester. He is flawed, but at the end, Jane, with her goodness, makes him good as well. I can understand that why this is appreciated, and I don't disagree with including this novel in an English course. That being said, I don't think that is that good of a novel. I don't really understand why people love it that much. Well, I think I do, but and we'll get to that. But at the time I read it, especially knowing that it was such a great novel, I was just why are people liking this? Am I supposed to like this? When compared to Jane Eyre, have you read Jane Eyre? That was my impression of Wuthering Heights. But now let's see what people who love it have to say about it. First review says, dark, atmospheric, disturbing, and fascinating. I love reading about horrible characters, doomed romances, bleakness, and darkness, so this was perfect for me. It's awfully dramatic and ridiculous at times, but I loved it all. Well, here is the thing. I don't have a problem with the darkness, the bleakness, the ridiculousness, but it felt like with all of the other books that something was missing. Maybe it was just a style problem, and me coming from Jane Eyre and having that expectation and coming to this, which maybe has a more simplistic style. I have to say, I read this a few years back, so I don't remember things very correctly, but please don't punish me too hard for that. While I understand the uniqueness of the perspective, it almost annoyed me because you get such a limited view, and you don't really get into the psychology of the characters. So maybe that's another thing that I didn't like. Let's read another review. I fell in love with these books. I just couldn't bring myself to hate Heathcliff. Do people love this book just because it's a toxic romance? Is that the appeal for it? Because it feels like it, doesn't it? Because Heathcliff is an awful person, and I definitely don't have a healthy relationship or anything close to that. So maybe that is why it's so appealing. Maybe I should have read this when I was in high school, and I would have loved it more, but reading it in university didn't really like it. This is a quote. He's more myself than I am. Whatever our souls are made of, his and mine are the same. Always a pleasure rereading the classic, and this one is epic with capital letters. So now I'm convinced that one of the reasons people like this book is because of the toxic relationship, which I don't judge. All the power to you, but not for me. The next novel and the last one in the category of books that I really don't like, the next novel that I want to talk about is one that I have a lot of beef with, and I'll definitely do a video about it because I know it's very appreciated and very loved in booktube circles, and that is The Secret History by Donna Tartt. This is another novel that I didn't finish, but again, I did read more than half. I read it on my Kindle, and I think it was at somewhere like 65 or 70% read. So I read a good chunk of this book. So a bit of background. At my university, how it works, if you want to study literature, you have to choose a major and a minor. So my major was English literature, my minor was Italian literature. And in that Italian literature, we had a course on classic literature, classic meaning Greek and Latin. So I think Homer, Virgil, I think it's the English pronunciation. So we had a course on that. I really liked the professor. He had a very entertaining way to teach, and I started reading these classics and these works. And around that time, I also heard about the Secret History, and I think it was also the time when Dark Academia was very popular. So obviously, it interested me because I felt like I was this little bookworm, this fancy bookworm who reads. I didn't read them in Greek and Latin because I don't know neither, but I felt very fancy because I was reading Homer and thinking about the great Greek epics. So the Secret History sounded like a book that was right up my alley. As much as I did enjoy reading the Iliad and the Odyssey, they can be quite I don't know, tough to get through and to understand because they are full of themes and motives, and you need to have a good grasp on the Greek mythology in order to really understand them. So I thought, well, if I read a novel that tackles this, maybe it will tackle these themes, but in a more I don't know, manageable way, and I'll get something more out of the Iliad and the Odyssey. And it might also be fun because yes, I do want to pretend that I'm a fancy student in a university thinking about Greek and Latin texts. I picked it up and I started reading it. I didn't really like it at first, but I thought, okay, it's just the beginning. Let's read more, especially since it's a pretty big book. My kind of threshold is you need like 50 pages to read 50 pages of a book to really get into the flow of the novel. But if it's a longer novel, that can go up to 100 pages or even more. So I thought, okay, I'm not going to think any of it. I'll just move through it, move on with it. Maybe we'll get to the part that I was expecting. As I was reading, I started to realize that it's just a pretentious book that, yes, does tackle some of the subjects, but in a very superficial way. And it feels like it's just a book for people who want to seem smart but without actually being very smart. I think that's the most controversial I'll be on my channel. All of the time I was expecting to for something interesting and complex to come, because you don't only get the students that are studying Greek and Latin, but they are supposed to be one of the smartest people around, and you have one person that, and you're being told he's so smart, he's so intelligent, he constantly reads, you always see him with his nose in a book, his mind is, nobody can understand him, and you're being told that thing, and you're like, okay, I want to see that, I want to see him speak and be so smart, and me being in front of the book like, okay, I don't understand. I need to read this 10 times in order to understand what you said. Because I've read other novels like that, and I think Dostoevsky is a good example. So when he has a character that is a certain way, you'll see in dialogue, you'll see that, and you'll get those traits. So I expected this from this novel as well, but it never came. It just was so. Oh yes, they are smart. They are talking about smart things, but you never saw that. And it felt just like it fizzled out, and I was okay, this is a novel for people who want to pretend that they're interesting without actually being interesting. So much for me not passing judgment onto people. Anyway, that was my impression, and I had high expectations for this novel, but it is marketed as such, and it didn't deliver for me. However, I do want to reread it because I want to make a video on it. Mainly because rant videos are tend to be very popular, but they are also very fun to make. And I do want to have a video where I tell you what I felt was missing from this novel. That being said, mini rant aside, let's see some opinions from people who love this novel. One of my all-time favorites. It's been a while since I read it. Have to reread it soon. Great story, very intelligent, very fascinating, keeps you going on and on page by page until the end. Remember reading it on a camping trip in Canada. Simply brilliant. Top 10 best reads ever. Well, intelligent, I don't know. Is it intelligent just because it mentions the name of some Greek philosophers and it just tells you that the characters are very intelligent? Because I never, and that's another thing that I don't like about it. In one of the descriptions or something, it was like, oh yes, it shows you how these people try to adopt Greek philosophy, and it drives them to murder or something like that. And I was like, where is that process? Show me how they read Greek philosophy and they interpret it, and they interpret it in this twisted way that it makes them kill. Show me. I didn't see it. That's what I wanted to see, and I didn't see it. Alright, next review. This is literally the best book ever written. Donatart, you're a fucking genius. Respectfully disagree. Just try to read some Dostoevsky and then come back to, no, sorry. Again, this is completely subjective, and it's a bit fun to be sassy, but if you like The Secret History, I apologize, please don't take it personally. And that's to say, don't imagine that I am this brilliant person, because I've read the Greeks, I've read some Greek philosophy, I don't understand a lot of it, I need to put a lot of effort into those texts in order to understand them. So I'm not like some kind of genius. I'm a normal person who loves to read, but still I felt like this book was very superficial. Next review. This is a bit longer, but bear with me. This book is an absolute masterpiece and probably my #1 all-time favorite. Every time I read it, I am simply overcome with awe and joy at Donatart's perfect writing, characterization, plot, everything. Nothing I say can do justice to how brilliant The Secret History actually is. Looking at the 5-star rating, it seems insufficient. Anyone reading this who hasn't had the pleasure of enjoying this modern classic, buy it immediately. And while I am always happy to tolerate and accept people not loving the same things I do, different strokes and all that, I've got to say that if you don't like this, I am judging you. Well, I am also judging you for considering this a brilliant novel. Another thing I want to say, since I haven't finished this novel. Well, I'm not saying that Donna Dart is not a good writer or that this novel is not a good thriller, because ultimately I think that is one. It's kind of a thriller with an interesting mystery. Yes, it is. I'm not going to say that, but again, it being marketed as this highly intellectual, talking about Greeks and classic literature and philosophy, and it's intertwined with all of these old ideas. Not really. I didn't see that, to be honest. I think it was done in a superficial way. So it is kind of like a fancy thriller. Maybe a good fancy thriller, don't get me wrong, but still a fancy thriller. This was something a little outside of the realm of books I usually use, but I really did enjoy the story. The writing was sophisticated and compelling, and at times made the book hard to put down. If anyone has any recommendations for stories similar to The Secret History, let me know. Maybe that's another thing. Yes, it is sophisticated, but it's sophisticated for the sake of being sophisticated. So, again, for the people who want to feel like they are more smart and more sophisticated, they will read this book, but without any kind of substance, without any reason for being so. Again, I'll reread this and I'll read this and I'll come back to this review and I'll tell you if I change my opinion. But for me, you could have changed those students and just make them math students, and the story wouldn't change that much because the sophistication doesn't really influence what they do anyway. They are just fancy assholes. As you can see, I had a lot of things to say about this novel that I almost read. I'll definitely come back to it because I do want to, because I know it's very loved. And I don't know, I think it will make for a fun video. And maybe I'll change my opinion. I'm completely open to that. We're on to the last two novels that I want to talk about. And as I said, these two novels are novels that I liked, but that I don't want to read again. Lolita and The Collector. And I put them together because I think they are kind of similar in the theme. Lolita, I'm sure many people are familiar with it. It's very popular. It has been discussed over and over. Some people see it as a love story. I don't know what makes it a love story, but anyway, it's basically the story of a pedophile who traps a little girl, and you get to see in his mind and how he thinks about little girl and so on. It's very well written. I'll definitely agree that Nabokov's writing style is beautiful and very poetic, which is impressive since it wasn't his first language. That being said, it's also a very sickening book. And as I was reading it, in the beginning you do get that feeling of, oh, it's so beautiful, but at the same time I feel kind of bad for liking it. But that's for the first part. After that, when he actually gets access to Dolores and he gets to do all of the things, you get over it. You're just like, this is sick, and it makes you feel uncomfortable. The Collector, I say it's very similar. I don't know if it's not as popular as Lolita. It's about a simple office worker who inherits some money, and he kidnaps a student that he is in love with, and you get to see his twisted way of thinking. I think Fowles did a great job of getting into the mind of this twisted being, because at times you get to see him as a person, but then he does things like, I don't know, he drugs this girl and traps her. It's very, again, very difficult to read. And what made it even more difficult to read is that in the novel, it's a very short book, but very well written and very effective. You get to also see her side of the story. You see how kind of close she is to the outside world, because she hears things like cars and people, and you constantly get this feeling that she's close to escaping. I mean, maybe she could escape, but ultimately she isn't. And again, spoilers, she dies at the end. So the person, this guy kills her, and he just go on to the next girl that he wants to collect. Very well written book. I will definitely recommend it, but be sure you know what you're getting into, because it can be quite traumatizing. And because it was traumatizing, I don't want to read these books ever again. They are well written. I like these authors. I'm open to reading other books by the authors. Another novel from John Fowles that I would recommend is The French Lieutenant's Woman. It has kind of like an open ending, which is very nice and definitely not as traumatizing as The Collector. These are two books that I like, but I hope I never have to read again. Just to keep the theme going, I'm still going to read 5-star reviews for these novels, just to see what other people have to say. This novel was unlike anything I've read before, and the character of Frederick will certainly leave a lasting memory. So Frederick being the kidnapper. I don't think there's been a character that's made my skin crawl or forced me to talk back, shout at a book on so many occasions. Well done, Fowles. Definitely think book readers should have this book on their shelf. Completely agree. I also wanted to shout. I wanted to get into the book and do something to help the girl, and it's scary how well constructed is this character, because he definitely feels, and the fact that he's not an evil mastermind definitely makes you feel like, oh, this could be my neighbor, or this could be that weird guy that I'm seeing on the street. It makes you kind of scared to go outside. This review is a bit longer, but I still want to read it because I like it. Successfully horrified, me too. I went into this thinking I wouldn't be very impressed, mostly because it was written by a man in the 60s, and I don't exactly have the best track record for writing fully rounded, interesting female characters. Color me surprised, I guess. This turned out not only to be one of my absolute favorite books, but Miranda became one of my favorite ever characters. She was messy and stubborn and young and trying to find meaning in everything in life and in her captor. Him, on the other hand, well, he was there, he was fucking annoying, but that was the point. I don't understand people who say that these kind of books are their favorites. Because for me, a favorite book is that combination of, it kind of changes your perspective, but it gave you some kind of comfort. So also like people saying 1984 is their favorite book. Well, it's a very well written book. I liked it very much. I totally agree. But calling it my favorite makes you so uncomfortable. I don't understand it. Maybe it's a me problem. I don't want to say that he was just there, because he's also very well rounded and very well painted. And again, it does make your hair stand up, because he's so realistic, and it gives that impression that you can pass a person like that on the street and you wouldn't even know it. Now on to some reviews for Lolita, and keeping on the theme, I don't understand how people can say these kind of books are their favorites. This person says, I've lost count how many times I've read Lolita. 10 is a guess, could be more. I love it, but not the covers. I want to take a Sharpie to every one of them. I love Nabokov. He's not for everyone. No one is. Well, I do agree that. Now, why would you read Lolita more than once unless you have to study it? Maybe people manage to distance themselves more from these novels and they don't take it as, because for me personally, I tend to get a lot sucked into and kind of see the real life through the lens of that novel, which makes it so difficult, and which is why if I read Dostoevsky, then I need a break, because it's difficult to see the world like that all of the time. So maybe these people don't have that and they just enjoy the writing. In that case, I could see it, but I couldn't read Lolita like 10 times. No, definitely not. Next review says, I made a mistake of reading Lolita while I was writing my first novel. I promptly decided I was wasting my time. The next morning, I punished myself by typing I'm not Vladimir Nabokov 100 times in my forehead. I got a message around line 57 and went out to buy a new keyboard. Impact rating 10 out of 10, ranked number 1 my all-time top 10. I can understand that. It is very well written, and there's definitely something to appreciate with authors that manage to get into the mind of a sick person so well that they make your skin crawl, like Fowler also did in The Collector. But again, favorite top 10, I don't understand it. As a writer, okay, I could see it as a writer because you definitely distance yourself from the story itself and you just look at how it's built. So you have that kind of detachment. For me, that wouldn't be possible. And last review that I really like and that can summarize my experience with both The Collector and Lolita is brilliant. I'll never read it again. And I fully agree with you, reviewer. Both of these books, and this is for Lolita, but for me it applies with The Collector as well. Both of these novels are brilliant, and both of them I hope I'll never have to read them again. That was it. That was my list of books I didn't like, I hate, I dislike, despise, I don't know. Again, hate is a big word. I'm sorry if you felt offended by what I said. I tried not to take it too personally. If you meet me in the street and you tell me, oh, Wuthering Heights is my favorite novel, I'm not gonna be like, you're stupid. Definitely not. Hope you enjoyed it. For me, it was fun to have this twist and do things the other way around. For my next video, I don't know what I'm going to do. At the moment, I'm in a bit of creative crisis, you could call it. But either way, I'm trying to, as much as possible, I'm trying to have fun with this channel, and this definitely was a fun video. So thank you for watching me, and hopefully I'll see you in my next video.